The next section of our CSS file that we need to organize is the main body content. So this is going to be anything that goes within the main section of the site. This would be anything that is appearing within this area right here. So if we look at the HTML, the area that appears after the header is I have this section called section left, and then I have another section called section right, and then we have the footer that follows. So section left and section right are the items that we'd want to put within the main body content. So if we look down here, I have some rules for section left, section right. I have a rule for section full, which we actually don't have a section full class, but that's probably something that would go within that area. Since we're not using it though, I'm just going to delete it. And then I get into the media queries. So I'm not going to worry about those. I'm just going to grab the section left and section right. I'm going to cut those and we'll go up here to where we want these to be. And we're just going to paste these in. Now, obviously, I'm going to want to optimize the code. So you can see that I have my width. The width starts with a W, so that should go underneath these other items. So I'll put it underneath the float. The float is alphabetically should appear first. And then I have margin right and margin left of 5%. Probably makes sense to use our shorthand notation here, so I'm just going to change this to a property of margin, and we'll go ahead and set the margin on the top and the bottom to 0 and then 5% for the right and the left. So I'm able to shorten that one up a little bit. The next thing is the section right, so this actually has quite a few more rules that we've declared. I'm going to get background color and put that at the beginning of the stack. And then we have border on the top and on the bottom. Since I'm not adding border on the right and the left, I need to have these more specific selectors. So we'll go ahead and list them like this. Again, bottom, if we were dealing strictly alphabetically, should come before top, but I like to declare my selectors in the order that CSS normally does. So if we started at the top of a watch, we'd have top, right, bottom, left. So that's the way I usually would put them on the page as well. Then we're going to have a float on the right. So we'll have that appearing next. And then we have margin left and on the right. We could just repeat the rule, the shorthand rule that we're using for section left, and apply that here. And actually, if I look down here, I have a margin on the bottom as well, so we should actually include that. So this time it's going to be 0 for the top, 5% for the left and right, and 5% for the bottom. Then we can eliminate these. And we have padding on the left and the right as well. And currently, I am declaring pixel-based padding. Because I've made a fluid layout, I actually would prefer to use percentages. So I kind of played around with the numbers, and I know that I want to use 2% for the right, 0 for the top, 0 for the bottom, and I'm going to use 3% for the left. So just a little bit more on the left, and you can see here I had a little bit more on the left than I did on the right, but in this manner I can shorten this up a little bit as well. So I'm using a width of 84%. I have an extra 5% on the padding, which would get me up to about 89, and then I have some margin settings that I need to account for, so that is creating the space for the section on the right. Now before we move on, I do want to point out the best practice for class names. So when you think of naming conventions, you want to really think through how you're going to name things in your HTML and what makes the most sense. I often get a lot of questions from people who are just learning CSS, and they always want to know, how do you come up with the names? How do you name things? It's really up to you how you're going to name the different items that are going to appear on the page, but you should take into consideration that at some point in the future this page is probably going to be edited. So what if later on this page, instead of having this headline appear here on the left, what if that moves over to the right? And what if this area right here moves to the left? And what if we put pictures in here, or just whatever happens, something could change. But what's going to be really confusing is if that section with the headline is called section left, and then the area with all the text is called section right. If I flip-flop those, and then all of a sudden section right is on the left and section left is on the right, these names don't really make sense. So I find that when I'm creating two columns, instead of naming my sections like section left and section right, I think it makes more sense to name them something like column A and column B. So maybe this one would become column A and this one would become column B. Now you might argue that A comes before B, but just having these be A and B, it's not like it immediately has to be on the left or on the right. It just is the first column that was declared in my HTML. So I think that this is better. Now, of course, if I make this change here inside of the HTML, I need to update these names right here. So this one is going to become column A, and this one is going to become column B. And if I save both the HTML and the CSS and we refresh, you can see that we're losing our two column layout. So what's happening here? Let's just go in here and figure out what we've got. Actually, what's happening right here is that the layout that we're looking at is based on the media query, and since I haven't updated the names that are appearing down here inside my media queries, see I have section left and section right, the layout is breaking. So if I was to resize my window so that it was narrower, then the layout is working in the way that we want. If we want this layout to work at the large screen view, I need to update the media queries. So that of course makes sense. If I come down here, section left is now col A and section right is now col B, and I would just want to make sure that I would change that anywhere else it appeared. But if we save now and we look back in the browser, you can now see that the layout is reminiscent of what we had before. So that looks much better, and then as the layout resizes down, when it hits the breakpoint, it's going to go to that one column layout. So that's more along the lines of what we're looking for in our final project. So now we have the rules defined for our column A and column B. I'm going to go ahead and just leave the generic selector section open for right now. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit later. I have my rule for my footer, and I'm just going to want to organize this so alphabetically it makes sense. The footer clears both, and that's clearing the two floated columns, so I'm going to have that appear here. We have color. I'll reduce the color declaration down to just 3 characters FFF. I can leave font weight here. Font size is using a size of extra small. Text align of center, I want that. All of these margin settings can be consolidated, so we're just going to change this to just being margin. Margin on the top and the bottom is 5%. We're going to use auto for the right and the left. I'll eliminate this. And then for our padding, we're going to use shorthand notation here as well. So for the padding, I'm using 10 pixels all the way around. I can just declare that one time using shorthand and get rid of the rest of these rules right here. So that is going to take care of the footer rules. And if we save and we just look inside of our browser, you can see that now the page is coming along. It should look great at the small size because all of the rules we've been concentrating on have to deal with the mobile or the small size screen. There are a couple little tweaks that we need to adjust at the larger size screen. I don't like how this is not lining up right here, so I'm going to want to make some adjustments to that. But other than that, this is just about done. We'll just take a look at the media queries now that we have defined these things. But before I move on and do that, I just wanted to reiterate what I was talking about the naming conventions. Just make sure that you're cognizant of the fact that you need to be naming things based on what they are and not what they look like. So anytime you give a class name to something, it shouldn't be based on what it looks like. It should be based on what it is. So for example, let's say I had some kind of comment or something that was appearing down here inside of the footer, maybe this little yup, she's a monster. I wanted that to appear and be called out in a specific way, be a different color or something like that, or maybe Nessie needs to be a different color. Let's say we wanted that to appear orange. Well, back here, and I'll make a rule for this inside of generic selectors, if I was going to name that, I might want to call it special orange, right? That would be descriptive of what it looks like. So if I come back up here to where I have my color guide, I have this dirty orange color, so I'm just going to use that since we already declared that. So if I had this class name that I'm making called special orange, and I declared it as being orange, this is not really a great name, because what if somewhere down the road I decide I don't want that to be orange, I want it to be a different color or something like that. So it might be better to give it a name like special footer or special comment or something like that. Just anything that makes a little bit more sense. So I'll just use special comment. I'm going to come into my HTML, and around the word Nessie, I'll just add a span tag, and we'll assign a class of special comment there. And I'll take the closing span tag and put it on the other side of the word Nessie. And now if I save both the HTML and the CSS and we go back into the browser and refresh, we're going to see that the word Nessie in the footer, as soon as my page reloads, is going to be orange. So that restyled this in being orange, but the name that I chose to use is not tied to the color orange, because maybe I might decide at some point, I don't really want this to be orange. I want it to have a font style of italic. And if it still had a name of special orange, that doesn't really make sense. But now that it's just special comment, I can change it for something other than color, and it's just going to apply whatever that style is. So again, when you name things in your CSS, the technique that you want to do is give it a title of what it is and not what it looks like. And that's a really good technique to use as you go through and plan your HTML and your CSS names, so that they end up being more functional for you, and also for people who might be working on the document even after you've produced it and you've pushed it to the web, because change is going to happen. Things are going to change. So when you're naming things, use names that are what they are, not what they look like.